So in today's lesson, we're going to talk about a phenomenon in genetics called multiple alleles. So when we talked about Mendelian genetics, we saw that there were only two phenotypes. There was the dominant phenotype and the recessive phenotype. So for example, if you had, you could have either a tall plant or a short plant. You could have either yellow seeds or green seeds. And then in yesterday's lesson, we looked at the case of incomplete and codominance, where we saw a third phenotype that was the result of a combination of the dominant and recessive phenotypes. But in a lot of cases, there aren't simply two or three phenotypes, but there may be multiple phenotypes. And so the way that we've explained that is by using the concept of multiple alleles, where certain alleles dominate over other alleles, and there's a hierarchy where that's concerned. So for example, I've picked out a couple of pictures here with rabbits and with fruit flies. So let's look at the rabbits first. So here are the names of these different rabbits. We see a lot of rabbits just in our backyards and whatnot tend to look like this guy. This guy is an agouti rabbit. That's what the color is referred to. Then we have what's called the chinchilla rabbit phenotype, the Himalayan rabbit phenotype, and then the albino rabbit phenotype. And you can see here that I have the greater than symbols, and that's meant to indicate the hierarchy of dominance. So in other words, there would be 1, 2, 3, 4 different alleles here, each with a different level of dominance, and agouti being dominant over all of the other alleles, and so on and so forth. And we can say that the same is true for fruit fly eyes. So you know those fruit flies that sometimes can be nagging in the summertime, particularly if you have fruit that's ripe on your countertop. Well, next time you see that happen, I want you to take a close look if you can, if you're quick enough to see, well, what are the color of those fruit fly eyes? So again, there's a hierarchy of dominance here that we're going to talk about in today's lesson. You can see there are clearly 1, 2, 3, 4 different phenotypes. There's the red eyes, the what are called apricot eyes, honey eyes, and then white eyes. And so when we're looking at Punnett squares and trying to make some predictions with respect to the F1 and F2 generation and so on, we need to be aware of when there is a situation where there is multiple alleles and to take that into account when we're assigning the genotypes. So let's start the lesson. Okay, so as I mentioned, there is the case where there may be more than 3 phenotypes, and so there will be multiple alleles. Now you need to know that regardless of how many alleles that exist, each individual organism can only possess 2 of the alleles, okay? So for example, one maternal allele and one paternal allele. But there may be just more than 2 alleles, 2 different types of alleles to choose from. So we saw the example of the fruit fly. So the scientific name for fruit fly is Drosophila melanogaster, and it comes up a lot in genetic experiments, this fruit fly, because it's fairly simple and easy to study, and so scientists have adopted it for that reason. Okay, so as I mentioned to you before, there are different types of eye colors. There's the red, or sometimes called the wild type, right? And it's the most common. So it is dominant over all other eye colors. We have the apricot, honey, and white eyes that are also possible, as we saw, but there's an order of dominance. In other words, the red eye color allele trumps all the other alleles, eye color alleles. Apricot trumps honey and white, and then honey, eye color, will trump white. So white is sort of what we consider the recessive genotype, if you will, or N phenotype. So I want to break this down a little bit more for you in terms of what the genotypes are going to look like in the case where there are multiple alleles. So I've chosen to use the capital letter E here for eye color, and I've assigned a number here for each of the eye colors as above. But, you know, this is simply one way to do it. it would have been just as easy to have put in an R, an A, an H, and a W representing the actual colors. But, it can get complicated in cases where maybe this, the phenotypes have the same letter. So you can decide that as long as you provide a legend that's clear to the reader, then you're good to go. All right, so here I've indicated the wild type and the possible genotypes. Well, I know that wild type or red eyes are dominant to everything. So as soon as there is a red eye allele present, then all the other alleles get masked. And so I can have these 4 possible genotypes. So red eye with red eye, that would be the homozygous dominant. I could have red eye with apricot, and of course that's still going to be a fruit fly that has the red eyes, because that as soon as that red eye allele is there, then the other color gets masked, and so on and so forth. So when I talk about apricot eyes and I want to identify the genotypes that are possible, I know that I can't have an E1 there because the E1 would make the eye color red. So I know the possible genotypes for an apricot-eyed fruit fly would be E2 and then some other number. So I know E2 works, and that would give me an apricot. I know if I had E2, E3, then that would also work because the 3 representing the honey would get masked by the apricot, and then of course E2, E4, which would be the white. And so, the apricot I know is dominant over the honey and the white, and so I'm good to go. What I want you to do is I want you to take a minute to fill out the possible genotypes for honey and for white, and then to resume the video when you are ready. Okay, so here, check your answers, see how you did. So I'm hoping most of all that you saw that white eyes was dominant over nothing, that there was only a single genotype, a single allele combination that could result in white-eyed fruit flies. So the order of hierarchy would have to be given to you in a question so that you could solve it, and it wouldn't just be you be expected to know it. So make sure when you're reading questions involving multiple alleles that you read closely and make sure you understand that hierarchy. Okay, so here is an example of a Punnett square that you might see. So again, the process of doing this is not going to be that different than doing a monohybrid cross. It's just that how you analyze the results will involve you having to look at the legend for hierarchy. So in this particular question, it says if a wild type is crossed with an apricot eye, notice they give us the specific genotypes because they can vary. Predict the genotypes and phenotypes of the F1 generation, so the first generation. So I'm going to do my Punnett square. I'm going to separate the alleles for the wild type or red eye, so E1, E4, and then E2, E3. And now I'm just going to do my cross as I normally would, putting the numbers from lowest to highest, so E1, E2, and then I would have E2, E4, E1, E3, and then E3, E4. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to analyze, well, what are these fruit flies going to look like? So I'm going to look closely at the dominant allele. So I see I have an E1 and I have an E1. And so anytime you have an E1 there, that means that that particular fruit fly, regardless of the other allele, is going to be red-eyed. So I know that I'm going to have, it looks like 2 out of 4 or 50% red eye or wild type. And then I'm going to look at the other two. And so I've got an E2 and I've got an E3. So the E2 is telling me that I have 25% apricot eye. And then the E3 is telling me that I have 25% honey eye. So in this particular cross, I'm not seeing any of my white eye. So it's as simple as that. Let's look at the next example. I'm going to get you to try it on your own, and then we'll take it up. So in this particular example, it says find the F1 phenotypes if a white-eyed fruit fly is crossed with one that has honey-colored eyes. And they give me the genotype for that. So I'd like you to try this question and then resume the video when you've attempted it, and the answer will be there for you. Okay, so let me just take you through this question. So I first deduced that the genotype for the white-eyed fruit fly would have to be E4, E4. And so I set that up in a Punnett Square along with my my honey-eyed fruit fly. And then I did my cross as usual. And I found that I had 50% honey and 50% white in my offspring, in my F1 generation. Hopefully you did okay with that. There'll be some more practice in your textbook for you to try. Next, we're going to learn about blood types. So most of you in your everyday lives have been exposed to the idea that blood types exist, and you may know your own blood type. And so most of you know that there are 4 different blood types, and you can probably name them off the top of your head. Now, in a different lesson, we're going to learn about, well, what does it actually mean to have A, B, and O and AB blood types? What do those letters represent? But that we'll be looking at in a little bit later in the course. So you need to know from a genetics perspective that the alleles for A and B are co-dominant. Okay, so if they're both present, then they both are expressed. However, in this case, since we have 1, 2, 3 different alleles, that when A and B are going to be present, we need to know that they're also dominant over O. So typically when it comes to O, we will sometimes see it represented as a lowercase little I to show that it's recessive over the other types. But I will leave that up to you. So there are 4 blood types. We can have the case where we have type A blood when A is by itself, and we have type B when B is by itself, and we have type AB when A and B alleles are both present, and we can also have type O blood if both of the recessive alleles are present. So I'm going to go into that in a little bit more detail. Okay, so now that we've talked about what the different blood types are, let's look at what the possible genotypes might be. Again, remembering that A and B are co-dominant and O is recessive relative to the others. So if I look at type A blood, well, I can have the case where I have 2 big A's, and that will result, because A is a dominant allele, that will result in type A blood. I can also have the case of A being paired with my recessive O allele. Now, you can choose, as I said, to either write that with an O, or you can just write it with a lowercase I, and that just helps you to remind yourself that O is in fact recessive. So those are the 2 genotypes that you can have if you have type A blood. Type B blood, on the other hand, is also codominant. So as soon as there's a B there without an A, then you're going to have type B blood. So the way that that can happen is if I can have big B, or I can have the heterozygous situation where B still is dominant with capital B lowercase I representing our O, which is recessive. Now, for type AB blood, there is only one single genotype. I have to have an A allele and a B allele present, and they have to codominate in order for AB blood to show up. Now, type O blood, in the same way, as soon as I have any of the other alleles for A or B, then the O type blood will not be expressed. So the only way that I see type O blood expressed is if I have little I. It is the homozygous recessive blood type. So let's see how this plays out when we look at Punnett squares. So here's an example to start us off. We have a woman with blood type AB that marries a man with the same blood type. What are the phenotype probabilities of their children? Okay, well, all I'm doing in this case is just saying a person with AB blood type crossed with another person with AB blood type. So that's a Punnett Square that is a monohybrid cross. So all I'm going to do, as I have before, is simply separate the alleles and perform the cross. So then when I perform the cross, I'm going to end up with an AA. I'm going to end up with an AB. I'm going to end up with, and I'm going to just write this as AB, and then another BB. So it looks to me like I have 50% AB blood type in the offspring likely to be happening, and I have 25% type A, and I would say type A, I wouldn't say AA, that's a genotype, and then I would have 25% type B blood. So I'm going to give you another question to try, and then we'll take it up. So let's take a look at this question. It reads, a man has blood type A. A child has type O, and his mother is type B. Could this man be the father? Use a Punnett Square to show your reasoning. So this is a bit of a way of problem solving using Punnett Squares. And in fact, geneticists would use Punnett Squares in order to make some predictions about offspring. So give this a try and then come back when you're ready. So there are many different ways of going about solving this problem. You could simply do all of the Punnett Squares for all of the different possible genotypes for the mother and the father and go from there. I'm going to show you a strategy that I used, which is almost like doing a reverse Punnett Square. So let me show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to just set up my cross, and I know that dad is type A, and but I don't know whether this over here is a capital A or a little I. And then over here I would have mom, and mom is type B blood, and by the same token I also say, well, you know, I don't know what might be here. But one thing I do know is that baby is I, right? So presumably, if this I genotype exists for type O blood, then the I had to come from either parent. So let's see how that works out. So if I take one of the I's and move it up here and another one over here, and then I just need to examine, well, is this a possible genotype for type A blood? Well, yes, it is. Is this a possible genotype for type B blood? Yes, it is. So is it possible that the man is the father? Absolutely, yes, it is. So that's simply one way of many that you could use to solve this genetics problem. You could do trial and error, and that would also be a way that this could work for you. So that's it for multiple alleles, looking at fruit flies, rabbits, and blood types. I'm going to be providing you with some practice questions to try out from your textbook. And as always, if you have any trouble, please make sure you reach out.